right, we're now live. People are rolling in. This is good. We're not just talking to ourselves. That's always progress. Um, for everyone tuning in, it looks like we're just rolling up on 12:30 right now, so we'll get started in just 1 second. Glad you were able to join us here for a special round of the Telek. It's my great honor to be co-hosting today with one of my best friends, Jesse Kramer. Besides having phenomenal taste in friends, he's one of the brightest guys that I know. And if you've read any of his stuff on the Best Interest blog, his brain just works differently than a lot of the ways that advisors that are taking on personal finance work. He's so good in the data and really hits hard on all of the details behind things, and not just a blind trust that this is how economic policy works or how personal finances work, which is very needed in this world. In his spare time, he's got a beautiful girlfriend, Kelly, that he lives with, and Sadie, I know his dog is off screen there, and is an active foster dog parent, which is, I have to think, the most fun and maybe some of the hardest job that you can be doing, as they are not always potty trained. So glad to have Jesse on the show. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Craig, thank you for that very, very kind introduction. Very happy to be here. Very happy to be talking with the Sage Ready crew. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. So as we were getting ready for this, as I kind of asked you onto the Telek, and we've been talking back and forth on what makes sense to talk about, one of the blogs that you had written that I thought was really applicable, kind of resonated with some of the things that some of the participants in our plan had brought up. Is this blog, the exact title was "The 2010s Will Happen Again." I thought was really relevant and pretty interesting. Would you just dive into a little more, give people some background?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So I wrote that article about a year ago, last January, I think, right at the end of 2019, right at the end of the 2010s. The story, though, I think we should go back to maybe the early 2000s to kind of set the stage, because the 2000s were the quote unquote lost decade of stock market returns, where we started the decade with the dot-com bubble. We ended the decade with the financial crisis. And it was a terrible decade for investors. And then the 2010s started, and the 2010s ended up being essentially a 10-year bull market, where we saw the returns that we hoped we would see from investing in the stock market. And I think seeing the 2010s occur after the 2000s just gave us this great feeling like, man, the 2010s were a terrific decade for investors. And some of the sentiment I saw on, forums I read, or maybe readers responding to some of my writing, Twitter, those kind of things. Some of the sentiment was the 2010s were like once in a lifetime. They'll never happen again. And this kind of left two conclusions for people. The first one is kind of a disappointing feeling, like, oh, well, if I wasn't in the market in the 2010s, I might have missed the best investing opportunity of my life. And the second feeling is kind of this perhaps irrational feeling that humans get, which is what goes up must come down. And if the 2010s were as good as everyone's claiming, well, we're probably in for something bad right around the corner. So I dove into the data a little bit, and it's publicly available data. All it is really the S&P 500 returns, assuming that you're reinvesting your dividends, which most people in long-term investing plans do. Going back, I went back to 1930. And so I looked at the 9 decades between 1930 and the start of 2020. And out of those 9 decades, the 2010s come in 4th place. So not exactly out of this world. And then I went one level deeper, which was to look at all 10-year periods over those 90 years. And by that, I mean, March of 1943 to February of 1953, that's a 10-year period. So let's look at all those 10-year periods and then look at the 2010s compared to those. The 2010s beat about 74% of those 10-year periods. So was the 2010s, or were the 2010s good? Yes, I would say the 2010s were good. They were above average compared to historical returns. But were they Were they so good that you missed your one chance in your lifetime for a great 10-year period? I don't think so. Were they so good that we have to assume that something terrible is right around the corner? I don't think so either. So I just, that article, I think, kind of put the 2010s in perspective. They were an above average year or above average decade. It was a good 10-year decade, 10-year period to be in the market. But I don't think we have to go to such extremes as to say it was so good, now I need to feel bad for missing my shot, or it was so good that the market just has to revert to the mean and something bad's right around the corner.
Yeah. So it's not an outlier by any means.
Correct. Exactly.
So I don't know. I didn't prep you for this. Do you remember what the best 10-year period was? Should I have a moment where I regret I wasn't in the market at that point?
I do know. I know the 90s were definitely near the top.
Yeah.
And one of the nice things, Craig, about writing on the internet is that you can just go back to your blog at any time you're calling in from a browser, and you can look at the data yourself. I know the 90s were really good. I mean, some of the decades before you and I were alive is the kind of things that you don't realize it. So, okay, here we go. The 1950s, including dividend reinvestment, up 466%. That was the best decade.
Yeah.
The 90s come in second. The 80s come in third. The 2010s come in fourth. 2010s, including dividend reinvestment, the S&P was up 246%. So it's good. It's really good. That's why we want to invest in the stock market. And for someone maybe who's listening in now who might be approaching retirement age and has been doing these kind of things, investing in the stock market since, say, the 80s or the 90s, they've seen a few good decades, one bad decade, but overall they've seen a lot of growth.
Yeah. So can you kind of carry that thought process forward? What if you don't have decades ahead, right? Okay, I recognize the 2010s were really good, and odds are, hopefully I'll have another one of those in my lifetime. But what if I am planning on retiring in less than 10 years? How does that play into things?
It's a good question. And this is just my 2 cents here. If I were approaching retirement age right now, I would carry 2 thoughts in my mind. Both of them are true thoughts. The first thought is I've got a short time horizon until my retirement starts, but I still have a reasonably long time horizon until the end of life. Or I'm hoping that I might be retiring in 5 years, but I'm still going to be living for 35 years.
Yeah.
So if you kind of think about dividing your money into those buckets, whether it's 2 years at a time or 5 years at a time, however you want to do it mentally, some of those near-term buckets of money I might put into some lower risk assets, because I kind of want to have the stability, the guarantee that money is there when I need it in the next few years.
Yeah.
But with my longer term buckets, personally, I would stick to something that I expect to grow more over time. Balancing risk and reward, obviously. There's a really good quote from, I think, William Bernstein, who said, it's not necessarily about dying with the most money. You just don't want to run out. So you got to balance some risk and reward in there. But the buckets that are meant for 10, 20, 30 years from now, you could probably afford to leave those in a quote unquote riskier asset, which stocks, some would say, are riskier than, say, treasury bonds. So does that kind of answer the question, Craig?
Yeah. I think that's a perfect answer, right? Recognizing time horizon is pretty broad when it comes to retirement, and for a lot of our clients, it's leaving a legacy is important too. So it's not even even when I'm having the conversation with an 85-year-old, it's, well, you have a purpose for these dollars that extend beyond you, right? The American dream doesn't end at the end of your life. It's passing it down generation and making that impact. So I think it's valuable. When are these dollars that I have going to be spent? And the answer is not day one of retirement, I hope, right? There are certainly people that opt for that, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it.
Right.
All right, a couple other questions for you. This one I think is really fun. I had gone back through the blog and went back to one of your very earliest ones, which I think is has sparked so many conversations over a beer for us. What are the most interesting misconceptions that you run across, or like what things you're just like, huh? Like either, of course, that makes sense, that it would be an easy misconception, or my God, that is just a really troublesome misconception. I can't believe it's out there.
Oh my gosh, there are a bunch. There are a bunch, Craig. And one thing that I have to remind myself of is that everyone's at a different spot, kind of on their personal finance or their investing journey.
Yeah.
And so one of the misconceptions that comes back to my mind, because I remember hearing it when I was 16, working in the break room at Fairhaven Beach State Park over near Oswego, for those who are local. I cleaned bathrooms at the state park. And during break, one of the guys was saying, I don't want that raise. It's going to put me in the next tax bracket. And it's actually, I'm going to lose money. And just as my naive 16-year-old self who didn't really understand personal finance, I just thought to myself, there's no way the system can work that way. I don't know how the system actually works, but I know it can't work that way. And of course, it doesn't work that way, right? We have these marginal, this graduated tax bracket where only the dollars that fall into the higher bracket get taxed at that higher level. But that's like a pervasive, very simple, I would call, misconception that you do still hear.
Yeah.
But then there's just, you can kind of get more and more into the nitty gritty details of personal finance and investing and still find misconceptions kind of everywhere.
Sure.
A good one that actually I'm republishing an article and sending it out this Friday about the Trinity study, which is where the 4% rule comes from, if people are familiar with the 4% rule. And in the financial independent retirement early community, the FIRE community, a lot of people say, I'm just going to spend 4% of my money every year. And the Trinity study, the 4% rule says I'll be okay. And it's more nuanced than that. It's the way the study worked is, it assumed a 50-50 portfolio of stocks and bonds. It assumed a 30-year retirement. So if you're planning on retiring at 40 and living till you're 90, that's a 50-year retirement. The 4% rule might not apply to you. Just there's nuance. There's always a little bit of nuance. It always helps to have someone digging into the nuance, whether it's you or yourself, or whether it's your financial advisor at Stage Ready, whether it's a trusted blogger on the internet.
Yeah. I always love I feel like I always get questions of like, so what does everybody do, or like what's the hard and fast rule? And it just across finances, it's never as simple as like, oh, here, like you just check this box and 4% works for everybody across the board. It's like,
Right.
Yeah, money touches every part of your life. It's crazy to think that your financial experience is going to be, operate so similarly to everybody else.
Right. Absolutely. It's all the whole, rules of thumb, or another word for that are heuristics, are these ideas that it's nice to be able to condense things down into these simple tidbits of advice that mostly apply to most of our lives.
Yeah.
The 4% rule is a good one. Save 20% of your income. That's a good one. Your house should cost less than a third of your total budget. Whatever those kind of rules are, those are great, and they're terrific starting points.
Yeah.
Almost across the board. It's a great starting point, but it's just a starting point. And it helps to go a couple levels deeper, see how it applies to your specific circumstances. It'll lead to more success if you do things that way.
Definitely. Well, 15 minutes goes by extremely fast. I want to make sure that I ask the most important question for you. How can people find you if they like what you've been saying, or hate what you're saying and want to find your blog to comment backwards? How do they find you? How can they get in touch?
Sure. Thanks, Craig. The blog is bestinterest.blog. fairly straightforward address, bestinterest.blog. You can leave a comment right on an article that you find. If you go to the menu, there's also a way, there's a contact, and you can just email me directly if you want, jesse@bestinterest.blog, Jesse. If you're on Twitter, which I understand not everyone is, I can usually be found on Twitter. My username is bestinterest_JC.
Great. Yeah, and I hope people will take you up on that, or sign up for the blog and get the weekly emails. Really good stuff. Objectively speaking, really good stuff. I forwarded so much stuff to other people that work in the industry of like, have you ever even considered this? The one on like The Big Short was eye-opening. The one on index funds and the analogy with cruise ships, I thought that was just nothing I'd ever heard before. So really interesting. I want to wrap up quickly, so we definitely are happy to take questions. I know Jesse and I could probably talk like this for another 6 hours, so we won't hold you all on there for that. But if you want to submit any questions, the chat and the Q&A are definitely enabled, so feel free to submit things. Happy to give you thoughts, or more importantly, Jesse can give you his thoughts. I'm sure you're sick of me by now as we're Telek number 20. But before we dive into those, last and most importantly is thank you. So first thank you is to Jesse. Thanks for being on the Telek today. Certainly appreciate it and your insights. Second thank you is to all of the people tuning in today. I appreciate your time this afternoon. And as always, thank you for the business and trust you're placing with me and that you're placing with all of Sage Ready. We certainly don't take that lightly. I'll take a look here for the Q&A, but it looks like maybe we have a timid audience today. No one wants to submit any questions. So I'll ask you one more while we're waiting to see if there's other questions out there. I love asking people, would you rather have a $10,000, or would you rather have your expenses reduced by 10 grand or your income increased by 15?
It's a good question. If I were going to approach it from a mathematical point of view, Craig, I think I would have to see how those two numbers affect my savings rate, which is, the amount of money I save divided by the amount of money I earn. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure. I think it would end up being pretty close, but depending on kind of where you fall on the salary scale and how much you spend, you could make an argument that saving $10,000 would actually be more beneficial than earning an extra 15, assuming that occurs year over year over year. It might enable you to actually potentially reach retirement earlier if you're curtailing your spending rather than increasing the amount you earn. So it's kind of, and it's a bit of a non-answer. I know I've given you a bit of a non-answer, but the idea is, if you can get away with only living off of, say, $20,000 a year, well, you might have a lot more flexibility to retire early than someone who's living off of $30,000 a year. So yeah, that's a good question. I'd have to jot some numbers down to give you a hard answer.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's so many ways to go about it, and like just the emotional side of things of, okay, would I really enjoy not spending 10,000? Like, am I missing out on whatever would have been included in that 10 grand a year?
Right.
Would I feel more energized by having this larger paycheck? Does it kind of feed my ego? Or the other side of things, there's certainly systems that benefit the lower end, like needing less income. So you mentioned retirement or our tax scale, right? The lower you are on that lower rate you end up paying, or you hit retirement and Social Security is going to make up a much larger chunk. If you added on a $15,000 raise, actually lowers the percentage that Social Security will end up replacing. So it's kind of an interesting trade-off. Because my initial thought is like, shoot, 15 grand extra in raise would be great. But I have a much harder time even imagining cutting my living by 10 grand.
Right.
Interesting thought process. Oh, this is a good one. We just had a question submitted. Thoughts on how the new administration will affect the market?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Lois. I mean, I've got my 2 cents, Craig.
I'd love to hear your 2 cents, Jesse.
Okay. See, I'm going back right now. I'm going back to find the article that I wrote at the, trying to think of when it was. It was probably at the end of October. So apologies here for the momentary silence. I think it's the article where it's called "The Market Crash is Coming Eventually." Okay, that's the title of the article if you want to find it on the blog. It's written on October 23rd. And Lois, I went back and I looked at historical markets, whether a Republican was in charge, whether a Democrat was in charge, those kind of things. It's kind of a wash. But one interesting tidbit is that the stock market does tend to perform a lot better when the Congress and the president are aligned in the same party, because they can presumably get along better, pass more legislation, grease the wheels of the economy, something along those lines. So that's like part A of the answer. Part B of the answer is just that the market has largely already taken the new administration into account, right? The market is forward leaning. Future events are often priced in, pulled backwards, and priced in early. There's a really good quote from Burton Malkiel, who says, if everybody knew that the market was going to go up 20 points tomorrow, it would just go up 20 points today. In that, people would react to that news and they would buy as long as it made sense to buy until you reach that, say, 20-point threshold. So I think the market has already adjusted to the new administration. Over the past couple months, that has been a positive move. As the administration perhaps comes out with new policies or things that we weren't really thinking about, we might see the market react in different ways. What do you think, Craig?
Yeah, I tend to align with that. One of my partners here, Jim Burke, always likes to comment. So, well, if clients bring up political questions, and his answer is always, we're not in the red party, we're not in the blue party, we're in the green party, we're in the party that believes in making money. And he also points out and says, Washington's job is to create laws. Business's job is to adapt to those and go back to making money, right? The stock market is very much profit driven and looking for ways to continue to innovate and to grow. I think I see some definite positives in the new administration, just in that they're more centric. I think when you kind of look at the political spectrum and how people are reacting to things, the further you go out from the median, that means you're upsetting a larger mass of people. So I think it'll be more of a non-event than an event. I think that at the end of the day, we'll see other forces driving the market a lot more than a change in the White House. I think that COVID for the market is going to end up being a large positive, as we see companies have had the necessity to innovate and will come out stronger. Those that survive are a lot more lean, a lot more profitable. And I think that will have a big impact once we actually do see things consistently open back up. And I'm cautiously optimistic that will continue on a positive path there. Thanks for submitting the question.
Excellent question. Excellent question. That's on a lot of people's minds. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish I had my crystal ball, but it's still back ordered from Amazon. So, well, that's as good of an answer as we can give you. If anybody else has questions, definitely feel free to dial them up. We'll hang on for another minute here. If not, I'll let Jesse go back to his day job as a thermal engineer and dabbles in finance, dabbles in knowing all of this crazy personal finance stuff. And then, yeah, I
good hobby.
can only imagine. Yeah. If you can believe it, my hobby is not engineering on the side. So I'm impressed you're able to manage both of these. Well, it seems like that might be it. Jesse, thanks again. Everyone tuning in, thanks again. It was really a pleasure to do this. It's kind of a fun break for me from having to just talk to myself to a computer screen. So this is really good. I hope everyone stays safe and healthy out there.